Welcome to the Mission Driven Leader, presented by TaleoConnects.com, where we explore the new, unknown, and innovative themes for work and give people the ability to show up resilient every day. Here are your hosts, former Chief Knowledge Officer of NASA, Ed Hoffman, and partner and Vice President of Portfolio Management at Taleo, Laurel Sim.
Well, welcome back to the Mission Driven Leader podcast. Ed, as always, you're bringing in a fantastic big brain leader that I cannot wait to hear more about. How are you doing so far?
I'm doing great. Absolutely. No, this is, I've been looking forward to this. Again, as you know, you are one of my heroes, and Nabeel is another hero. So, so I'm looking forward to today.
Very cool. Well, before we get to our guest, I actually had a question come in from our audience, and I'm like, I can't turn down this opportunity to ask it. Ed, what do you feel about UFOs? And this is a question from an audience member. They want to know.
Well, first of all, I'm glad we have an audience member. I'm a believer in UFOs.
Is that all we've got?
Did you want me to say more?
I would love something more.
Yeah, no, it's an unidentified object that's flying around there, so obviously they exist. I guess the question really is, do we think that they are life forms? I tend not to believe that a life form has shown up here in a spacecraft and then decided to say, hey, we're just going to leave, because that's not usually what happens. Usually they step in, they make themselves known. They say, we look forward to you working for us for the next several millennia. So, they're unidentified flying objects. I do believe that there's life on other parts of the universe. I think that's overwhelmingly likely based on probabilities alone. So
that's way too technical and on point. I was hoping for a little sass from you, but maybe we'll bring that question back to Nabeel as well and see what his opinion is on it.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll give it a chance. But no, I think this is, you got me thinking about that kind of thing. Have you, you're in Canada, so there's a lot. I think if a UFO showed up, they would probably go to a place that's got a lot of room and nice
space.
Yeah. Have you ever seen a UFO?
Well, I can see the stars at night. When I'm out at the farm, I can see the stars at night every single night, right? Unless it's cloudy.
Well, that's not really a big deal. I can see the stars at night too. I'm near Washington State, so.
Please, you guys don't even have the clue. And there are times where I see something moving, and I'm like, what's going on there? That's something got a little extra sizzle in that light there. So I'm always curious about it. I don't know if I'm fully committed to believing in it, but I'm not closed off and saying it doesn't, like that UFOs don't exist. Let's put it that way. Yeah.
Well, we know that UFOs exist because that's an unidentified flying object. We just can't identify it. We don't know what it is. I don't think anything that comes near us is filled with alien life, if that's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Again, if an alien life could go this far and get into this place, they're going to stop. And they're going to see things that they want to take.
Ed, right now it's the Calgary Stampede in Calgary, and we get an influx of an additional, 30,000 people for 10 days. Right. And I do believe there's a few aliens in that mixture, because some of the outfits that are rolling in are hot, really hot.
Yeah.
Hot. Well, introduce my guest. I'm so excited. Tell us all about him.
So I got to tell you, I'm looking forward to this. One of the things, I always talk about, I speak about in the Smart Mission and things like that, is the future really is about a few things. For an organization, for a team, for a project to be successful, you have to have a strategy and navigation of a destination. You have to have technology and data and digital capabilities, and you have to have the human element. And when I first met Nabeel a few years back, I was, just impressed by what Nabeel does is really the focus on the intersection of technology, data, artificial intelligence with a focus on doing it for the benefit of people. And he's got a tremendous experience background. I'm kind of impressed when I first met you, Nabeel. I thought you were very young. You look younger, but based on your experience, you almost have to be my age based on what you've done. But didn't mean to insult you so quickly. But you're the principal and co-founder of Change Force, which is around artificial intelligence. I wake up almost every Saturday morning with Nabeel, who produces I'm going to get this wrong, but 4-Minute University, which is one of the best pieces of mail I get which explains the things you need to know, things that you learn about if you go to any kind of a good school, like how do you learn faster, or why do you never want to use acronyms? There's all kinds of things, and he can talk about that. He's also, in addition to being an entrepreneur, at the intersection of technology, data, artificial intelligence, and how people change, how people learn, and working with human resource organizations. He teaches at Columbia University in the Human Capital School, the School of Professional Studies. He's taught at the New York University, and he has a very, impressive experience with organizations, I think with IBM, with JP Morgan, with the Conference Board, leaving several out, and all in this, with a real focus on learning development. And just as an introduction, I think one of the principles of our podcast is we really think it's really the strategic advantages about learning and learning quickly, use of technology, use of people, and Nabeel, you're one of the people leading the way. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ed and Laurel. And you've set the bar very high by talking about UFOs initially. So hopefully there's not a big drop off in listening after that. And so I hope to do some justice for that area.
If my extended introduction of you didn't lose the audience we have, I'm sure the UFOs will not do anything at all. So, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get? One of the things we've talked about, it's not unusual to get technologists about AI and digital and semiconductors and things like that. It's not unusual separately to get somebody about people, the human element, and the importance of people. You do both. How did you get there, and why?
Yeah, sure. And thanks again for having me on. Looking forward to our discussion. Maybe I'll start out with the story. Back when I was I think I was just starting undergraduate in college. And of course, just like many other people, I wanted to have a few bucks in my pocket to spend and do some things. So I took a part-time job doing tech support, and I'll be aging myself here, for Gateway Computers. If you remember them, they were well known for the cow box.
Cow.
Exactly.
Yeah, the fancy box, delivery box.
That's probably one of the better things that I experienced there, because again, I was on tech support side, and people weren't calling to say how great it was. They were calling with problems. So, but the reason why I mention it is, as you can imagine, a tech support job. And back then it was just purely over the phone. There was no remote login. There was no video that you could do anything, live chat. It was literally somebody calling a toll-free number and then talking through whatever issues they had. So you were really kind of, flying by ear, essentially. And what I learned during my training process, and really once I started getting on the phones and talking to customers, is that even in jobs like that are deep around tech support, which is really, I have some sort of software or hardware problem, let's say, and help me fix it. What I realized very quickly once I started talking to people is that in my training class, which was 2 weeks long or so, and I think it was 15, 20 people, I would say a good 18, 19 of them were smarter than me. So they knew how to build computers with their eyes closed. They knew all of that. When we got on the phones, however, the story I found out was very, very different. Their ability to communicate with people without getting frustrated, and to really understand and probe what issues they had, and then figure out a swift type of solution. That's where I feel like I was able to not only accelerate, but really understand the importance of, you can't just have, and again, this is my opinion, but it's a strong opinion, you can't just have a good technical skill set. And so to me, that was, I think, a pivotal time because I was just 18, 19 years old, starting my freshman year of college. And I was actually a computer engineering major. And then I started going into that and I'm like, you know what? I don't know that this is really what I want to do. So the next semester I switched over to computer science, more on the software side than hardware. And then a year later, I'm like, you know what? This is still a little too technical for me. Then I switched more on focusing on the business aspect. But my point is on the gateway side is a lot of the practical experience that I gained while trying to get some academic experience, I really informed the perspective that I had. And to me, that was really one of the first jumping off foundational points where I've kind of launched my career. And I like to describe myself as kind of being at the intersection, similar to Ed, how you described of the business side. So things in an organization, the technology side, which I think is important, but then also, well, how do people learn as well? And then that intersection between those three, that's where I feel like the real value can become, because oftentimes as somebody with a technology background, I hear people talk about, if I just had this technology, I would be able to do this. And then it's so far from the truth, in my opinion, because when people get it, then they realize, oh, well, we haven't changed our behavior, or there's a variety of other things that need to come with it that the technology itself almost always isn't going to make a big change for you. So
Yeah.
And isn't it like the age old story of that person was technically so competent. How come they weren't a good manager? What's like, why do we keep doing that? Why do we keep hiring those people or promoting individual contributors and putting them in roles like that that maybe don't have the skills or the foresight of which you have? Like it's a bit mind boggling at
yeah,
times.
you know, and all this organization will remain unnamed to protect the innocent, but it was an organization that I worked for
You can
prior.
name it. You can name it. This is the mission-driven
Oh,
pod.
okay.
We take pride in exposing
Well, it
everything.
was,
So
well, if
go
I have
there.
to be honest, it was NASA, and the chief knowledge officer was Ed Hoffman. So I tried to,
See ya.
I tried to avoid it, Ed, but but kidding aside,
That's not real.
I actually landed into this trap myself, where I was then working with as a teammate with someone who was technically and sort of the objectively doing the work very well. And I had mentioned to my manager at the time, I said, this person I think could be a good manager. And then what happened 6 months later, that person became a manager. And then they also became my manager, and it was not good. In all honesty, and then I realized that the way that the reward structures are typically in organizations is that they put you in these individual contributor roles, and I'm sure you know this and you've talked about it before as well with other guests, is that then the way that they're evaluated is based off of their ability to perform well as an individual. But then there's this different track to say, okay, now that you've reached this certain threshold and you've passed it, now we're going to give you the keys to become a manager, which turns out, of course, we know is a very different skill set. And then with that comes with little training usually initially. And to me, that sort of dichotomy, or that switch, it's almost like a bait and switch, so to speak, really sets a lot of people up for failure. And I think that's a lot of why when I started out really working in organizations, large enterprise organizations, you would kind of see this. And then I slowly started to shift more to kind of the entrepreneurial things, just sort of doing things myself. And I would say in part that's kind of what influenced it. But I think it's a dangerous thing where organizations are saying, well, you can be a good individual contributor, but you don't necessarily have to go the management route. So how do we really uh, create some type of organizational structure that allows people to say, do I want to be really good at the tactical aspects of my job? So maybe the individual contributor route, or do I want to be a manager? And those are very different skill sets. And to me, the danger really is when you take being good at one as a qualifier for being good at another or starting to be another. So it's a interesting
I
area.
wonder if the focus you have comes from a lot of your background has to do with learning and development,
Mhm.
right? So at J.P. Morgan, you were doing marketing and industry learning. At IBM, you're doing things around learning. At Conference Board, doing research around learning. Was it learning from the standpoint of how people perform better using technology? And did you get a sense that these different skills are then essential? What was the learning part that you learned from your time at KPMG, for example?
Sure. Yeah. And a lot of it, really, to your point, Ed, is understanding what does how do people learn, I think is an important area. And maybe since we're just sort of somewhat talking off the cuff here, is that a big issue that I see in organizations, if we talk about, let's say, like chief learning officers, which is typically like the head of learning in an organization, if you look at their background, I would say 80 to 90% of them don't even have a background in learning. And to me, that's a very dangerous thing, because if you have a head of legal, like your chief legal counsel, or you have a CFO, a head of finance, they have the requisite knowledge, technical knowledge, to be able to run that job. But oftentimes what I found out, since you're asking about learning specifically, is that there seems to be, even at the top, a lack of really understanding, here's how people learn, here's what motivates people to learn. And then as a result, the programs or outputs that come from organizations with people in these roles tend to be, while of course you can still do run learning decently well without having a true deep background, it tends to be oftentimes very superficial, and it fails to address where I believe the most critical aspect is really saying, well, are we helping people learn just to learn, or are we helping them to help us, our organization, solve some type of business challenge that we're having? And that's, as I mentioned before, kind of working at that intersection between, let's say, the business and learning and technology, is to say, well, if you just have the technology and the learning, sure, people are going to learn better, but how is this going to help the organization? Because if we're talking about in the context of the work that you do, if you're lacking that organizational lens, then I think that is a potential downfall. And essentially organizations will, and really the people in it, will start spinning their wheels and say, well, I'm learning, I'm upskilling or reskilling, I'm doing new things, I'm getting prepared for the future of work, but yet my work hasn't changed, or I don't really see any sort of end game for me. And so that to me is where I think the challenge, yet the opportunity lies as well, is to have a bit more tighter connection and really just understand like what motivates people to want to learn. And if we can understand some of those aspects, those underlying human motivational, psychological aspects, then we can start to make better organizational programs as well.
I think, I could totally riff off of this for a while, but I do think that it's not seen as a priority, that it's learning is a checkbox experience for senior leadership. And it's either they haven't taken the time to understand the value of it and the opportunity within it, or they simply believe you were already educated once, that should take you the rest of your journey. I don't know what it is, and I'm curious what your perspective on that is, because it's a real missed opportunity.
I think you're right, but I think it's changed. So I'm the oldest here, but I started working NASA in the '80s, and in some ways there was little reason to learn during that era. The notion was you developed a capability, you developed a talent, and you used that for the next 30 years. And even technologies would last you more than 10 years. By the time I had left, 2016, we had developed some of our new programs. The programs were already outdated before we had released them. And the technology, the span of changes so quickly. So I think learning is valued in an environment of change where curiosity is essential. It's not valued in a society where you're doing the same thing forever.
I don't fully agree with you, Ed. I think there's an
You partially
expectation.
agree with me.
I agree that you worked
A little
in the
bit.
80s. I agree that you worked in the 80s, of which I wasn't working yet. So there's that.
Yeah.
But I was alive.
Okay.
No, so I agree that there's a different business world in the 80s, right? And everybody had their job, they lived within that box, and they operated there. And I also believe that now we are learning at greater speeds. We have more curiosity. We have more opportunity to learn. What I'm talking to, or at least what I'm trying and probably not doing a great job of, is that we're not being thoughtful and observant of what the organization needs across the organization, and then individualizing that to the individual themselves, the business unit, and then the product success. That's what they're not doing that. It's not intentional. It's not thoughtful. That's where I think is the missed opportunity.
Yeah.
And so that's where I was trying to go with it. I think it has
Yeah,
evolved.
and I agree with that. I think we're in a transition though, and I'm going to turn to Nabeel to maybe talk about what you're doing with Changeforce, because I think the intersection of technology, AI, and data provides kind of a framework for understanding almost immediately that then demands immediate learning and doing things differently once you see reality. And so yeah, I mean, Nabeel, why don't you tell us about Changeforce and the connection of the technology with the change, with the learning, and fundamentally, do you agree with me or Laurel?
Hi.
Oh, time to go. See you later. No, I'm just kidding. So really first on the latter points where you both were debating on it, I think there's two things that stand out to me. Is one, I often think of like where you were talking about what happened, let's say in the 80s, 90s. It really reminds you of the fixed mindset versus the growth mindset. So
Yeah.
oftentimes, okay, these are the skills that I need to do my job. I have acquired those skills. Now I'm just going to execute on that. And then there's, as we're starting to see, of course, there's change that happens in any sort of at any time in the workforce and the generations. I think what we see a lot more now is the speed at which that change is happening is almost becoming too hard to ignore. So I think that's one area. And then Laurel, your initial point, I'll use an example from when I was at KPMG, and I helped to run learning for their business development side, basically for all the U.S. practice. So to help all the sellers to figure out how to make more money, market development, business development there. The other half of what I did was really all of because they were, again, a consulting firm and, accounting, et cetera there. So they were a lot in the,
I was a KPMGer.
oh, there you go. Yeah. And so there were a lot in the service business. They had a variety of industries that they would serve their clients in. And so I mentioned that because I helped to run learning for all of the US based industries. And as part of my job initially, I went and sort of had, let's call it a listening tour, so to speak, and met with each of the head of the different industries. And I remember I met with one person, I forget which one which industry they were part of, but I sat down or we were on a phone call, and she said, honestly, every single year I talk with whoever's in your position and the same thing happens, is that you just run me through some courses or you're telling me this, and we just have this conversation. You tell us that something's going to change. Nothing ever happens. Why should I listen to you? Why should I give you the time of day? And I actually thought it was very refreshing because this was someone who was very business oriented and was like,
Yeah.
I understand that you're doing this, but I don't really see the value of what you're providing. And so to me, I saw that as an opportunity to say, okay, sit down with me and take me through. And Ed, you and I have talked about this when you were at NASA, for instance, approaching people on the engineering side, and they were sort of shocked that, like, why is a guy from knowledge or learning or wherever coming in and talking to us? I did a very similar thing. And just to go on that listening tour to understand what are the challenges that you're having with your own employees, what do you think that if you had this could make things better for your organization to drive more bookings or revenue, et cetera there. And so we started to flip that conversation to align really the learning more towards the business challenges. And where I've seen, again, specifically learning, in my view, fail in the past is in part because the people who are typically in charge of, let's say, learning HR, they lack a business background. And not that you have to have an MBA, for instance, but understanding that you can leverage your courses, your education, your learning to help drive your business forward instead of them being a little bit more mutually exclusive. That's where I think the power is. And so what I was able to do, not only with this specific person, is we created something very specific for them. It wasn't a course. I mean, we had a couple of things that we had to do just to cover the basis where they could upskill themselves in their own industry knowledge. But we developed something like, for instance, a business simulation around what are some realistic types of situations that could evolve in their practice, and then allow them to really have more of a full day immersive type of interaction that didn't feel like learning. So that's a longer answer of saying it, but I think it's important to point out that this is where I think the opportunity is for learning specifically in organizations, is to say, really listen and just try to figure out what's going on there. And then once you can do that, then you can start to make a little bit more appropriate types of suggestions and solutions. So that's the go ahead, Ed, please.
And now I figured out the title of your company. I should have figured that. you're looking to be a force for change.
Yeah. Yeah.
By utilizing, I mean, that should be obvious, I guess, because it's change force. And
Yeah, sure.
so, but your initiation in terms of your interest in technology, data, artificial intelligence, the human connection, learning, is that you're always being confronted. Maybe going back to KPMG, of people saying, why are we doing this retreat? It never leads to anything changing.
Right.
And you're feeling the tools can help make that more successful. And yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And so a lot of the work, back to your question, Ed, around kind of the work that we're doing at Changeforce, is it really started out saying, okay, can we help leaders, let's say business leaders, predict problem areas before they happen? And so, as we know, kind of in the AI space, if you really look at what's popular today in AI, you can kind of categorize it, to borrow a marketing term. There's like downstream marketing versus upstream marketing. Typically, this is like these were terms used in oil and gas, like taking natural resources out of the earth and then transporting them and then refining them. But in the marketing sort of business area, in my opinion, where 99% probably of current AI tools today reside is more in what I would call the downstream category. So meaning short term, things that are very tactical, something that I can input something or analyze something and get it immediately to apply. So for instance, like copywriting or image generation or a variety of other things, getting some ideas on something very tactical, which is important. But if you really look and think about all the AI tools that you've heard about or have used, most, if not all of them, fall in this short-term type category. And so I mentioned that because part of what we were looking at with Changeforce is we were looking at the opposite end, the upstream. What's more strategic? What's more long-term? Can you use AI to help inform what you potentially may want to do a little bit more going forward in the future? And so where this came about, my co-founder and I kind of came both from the management consulting type area. Laurel, both you and I were at KPMG, of course, on the consulting piece. And if you really look around, like why, or not to make this whole conversation about consultants, but just the short answer is typically, why do people hire consultants in general? And within organizations, what we found out is there's two things. One is they just want to know what their competitors are doing, right? Because they're trying to get some neutral third party insight. But the other one is they want to figure out what's around the corner. What should I be thinking about next? And the reason why they hire a consultant is because they're too busy running their own internal business or practice that they don't have time to look outside their walls. And so what we found out is to say, okay, well, can we use technology for that second piece to help them look around the corner? And so where it started out is to say, okay, again, thinking back to the organization or the business, if you ask any business leader, so for instance, Ed, when you're chief knowledge officer at NASA, and if I was talking to you and I said, Ed, what is your knowledge strategy? You probably knew it off the back of your hand, right? You could
Like that.
it. Yeah, and you know it.
Right on the back of my hand.
There it is. It's probably still there. I think you got it tattooed, but
it is. I have it written down.
There it is.
So
that's a story for another day, right?
And
so the reason why I mentioned that is then the next question is, it's very rare that a senior leader does not know what their strategy is. But if you ask them the next level down, okay, what part do you think you should be focusing on now and why? Then the answers are all over the place. And usually it's, I don't know, I think I'm going to do this. Okay, well, or if they're more specific, I'm going to focus on this. Well, why is that? And oftentimes they're like, well, I don't know, I'm just guessing, or I have a hunch. So really where we started kind of looking is to say, can we help give a little bit more insight, a little bit more data informed guidance on how you could push forward your knowledge strategy based off of some AI based technology. And so maybe one more layer deep and then I'll stop, just to kind of tell you how it works, because I think it's interesting, is really saying, well, one, what's the initiative that you want to monitor, right? So for you, let's say at NASA, it's okay, we want to look at our knowledge strategy. So we take your knowledge strategy, we digitize it, and we put it into things that are a little bit more measurable. So what are some high level objectives? What are some measurable outcomes that we can then figure out whether the organization is performing well or not so well against? That's kind of step one. What do you want to monitor? Step two is then, what are the tools, or where are you going to get the data to help you figure out whether you're doing this well or poorly? And then oftentimes what organizations do typically is they'll send out surveys, right? Which I call solicited data. And
Right.
I don't know a single person who wants to fill out another survey, right? And so, usually it's like a necessary evil for organizations because they're saying, well, we don't know a better way to get data. And so it turns out there is a better way, is that you can do more observational or behavioral data. Where are people having conversations already? Are they using MS Teams, Slack? Are they in a project management type software? Where is the work taking place right now? Can you integrate a system with that? Can you anonymize it to make sure that it's privacy protected? And then can you figure out what is relevant to the knowledge strategy? And then can you essentially rank it? And then based off of that, you do that over time, it runs in the background. And then can we present that info to Ed to say, all right, in the past month, here's what we've seen. These two areas of your knowledge strategy seem to be performing the worst right now. Maybe you should focus on this. And really, it's more for, instead of, like, a lot of times when people talk about AI tools, they typically, it's human nature, of course, we tend to look at the extremes. Is AI going to replace our job? Or are we going to use a ChatGPT to write an essay for us? And oftentimes the reality is somewhere in the middle. Can we use it as a starting point? Can we get some ideas? Can we then refine it? And so for us, really, we're in that middle area as well, as to say, can you take all this data? Can you analyze it? Can you make meaning of it and present a short list to a human, in this case, Ed, to say, here's maybe what you want to look at first, but Ed has the final say. And that's essentially how it works, sort of so on and so forth. And the last thing, and then I'll stop, is that an interesting thing that we learned actually over the past, I would say 9-12 months, is we actually, in full disclosure, we thought that our product would be good standalone, is that somebody wants to use this, senior leader uses this, and then they can just go in and look at it, and then they're good to go. What we found out is, while there's a high level of interest and belief in the technology, there's very low level of, I don't want to say trust, but comfort in using it themselves. They still want that sort of that buffer in between. So they want essentially like a co-pilot or a human powered person to then sit with them, review the results, and then help make meaning of it. And so what we've done actually is,
They want a consultant.
Yeah, exactly.
Help me.
Yeah.
To learn how to do that.
And in closing, that's really where we ended. Is really more, it's like AI powered management consulting is really is what we've landed on now. And to say, okay, let's take what humans are good at, let's take what machines are good at, let's put them together, and then we could be a co-pilot to help you run your organization.
Yeah, and that's partly how we came together, Laurel, is that I'm a big believer that the key ingredients for a team to work well is effective culture, effective leadership, access to knowledge. And I was doing one of those old school surveys to find out where teams are, and Nabeel said, no, that's too old school, Ed, and there's a better way to collect data and make that available immediately and quickly. So it's the use of data to provide insights as quickly as possible, so we know when we're getting closer to the direction we want to go or when we're going away from it. So, Laurel, you're our mission-driven podcast expert on all things technology, data, digital, Canada, Calgary. What's your reaction to, I know that I can see from your looks, your head's ready to explode.
I actually have so many questions right now for Nabeel, but we do actually have to go into commercial break. And then when we come back, I do have like so many questions. I don't even know if we have time for it, to be honest, Nabeel. But when we come back, I would love for you to tell us what you feel is the most fun or curious AI tool that's out there for the social human, not necessarily business-wise, but somebody just to maybe advance who they are and what they love. Ed's is the art generator because he has so many magical words that he needs to bring them to art form. So he's the AI artist within this team. But we'll be right back.
We'll get back to the rest of the episode in just a moment. But first, a word from our presenting sponsor, TaleoConnects.com. As a manager, you know how important it is to solve issues right the first time. If you don't, you risk wasting precious time, money, and resources on things that could make the problem even worse. That is why at Taleo, we start by getting to the root cause of your specific problem, so that together, we can implement the solution that gets you the results you are looking for the first time. Taleo's unique approach to management consulting and resourcing is focused on building a community of experts that work together to help clients solve complex problems and find success in their businesses. We work collaboratively with you to implement the solution that will solve the root cause of your problem, not just the symptoms of that problem. From management consulting and project management to staff augmentation and resource recruitment, Taleo's trusted team can help you take your organization to the next level. If you're interested in learning more about how Taleo can help you overcome your organization's obstacles and take your business to the next level, visit TaleoConnects.com today.
All right. Thanks for taking the time off on the commercial. Oh, so fast. Oh my goodness. I ruined my mic there for a second. So what is that one social AI tool that you think, I could go home and tell my brother about, that's a farmer, remember? And he'll be like, hey, that's pretty cool, Laurel. Thank you.
So for me, actually, I'm very similar to Ed in the sense of generative AI for image generation. And so the reason why I mention this is that I do this with my kids. I have 2 elementary school age kids, and I say, we have an opportunity to just think of something in your mind, and maybe we can create some art based out of it. And it's been a really interesting and fun experiment that I've done a couple of times a month with my kids, is to say, take something that you're thinking of. And so, for instance, my daughter said something, okay, how about a cow sitting in a bathtub in a bathroom with sunglasses on looking in the mirror? I'm like, oh, okay. So we type it in, and we use something like Dolly, for instance, which is by OpenAI, same company as ChatGPT. And so to more specifically answer your question, Laurel, I like that one because it's a little bit more playful than the professional one, which is like a Mid-Journey. That's like if you're looking for really, really a polished, high quality professional type art. But if you're looking for kind of silly things, just in my opinion, to really just explore and just see what the possibilities are, I like using that. Now, the one other thing I would say is that a lot of times when people are talking about the generative AI side, the keyword being generative, so you put in some query, then you get something back, it's almost like Google. If you think about it, for the last 20 years, you go to Google's homepage, what's the one thing you need to know when you go to Google? You need to know what to search for. And if you don't know what to search for, it's useless. Similar with the generative AI, if you don't know what you want to be looking at or what some potential prompts are, then its utility goes down a lot. And so that's where I think where I start to see the opportunity for a lot of things going forward, is to say, how can we try to teach some of these skills around just thinking a little bit more creatively? Because while the tools will be able to do it, and I can never create this art technically myself, is at the same time, they're not going to be able to help you too much to creatively think about how to use it. So that's where I feel like the big skill is going forward. But
what's your favorite tool, Laurel?
Yeah.
Well, I've gotten on the Chat GPT train for sure. Mostly because sometimes we got tough messages to send out, and I pretty much want to say you guys are ridiculous.
Would you actually use that word?
Ridiculous. I want to use 3 words. You are ridiculous. But instead, I need to be thoughtful and intelligent, unlike what they're being in the moment.
Right.
So that's kind of actually, how you used to say, don't send your email till the next day if it's a tough conversation. Chat GPT is my email the next day filter. I've found, like, I'll put the email together and I'll throw it through Chat GPT, and they'll be like, oh yeah, that's much nicer. Thank you. Thank you for making me a better human today.
One other one I would mention, it's not really AI based, but I actually use it a lot in, for instance, I know, Ed, you mentioned the Foreman University, my weekly newsletter around how people learn, is I will run my content through something called the Hemingway editor, as you can imagine from Hemingway, the author. And it's really around, it's not AI based specifically, but it's really around just how to help you write better. So in the sense of, are your sentences too long? Are they hard to read? Are you using an active voice versus a passive voice? And the first time that I did it, I was just errors all over the place. And now I feel like my writing has actually become much better. And this is where I think, kind of on the learning side, where if you look at technology tools versus how people learn, there's oftentimes the best ones, you'll actually see an inverse relationship on usage. So in the sense of as you get better, you tend to rely on it less. So if you're looking at the usage of a tool, if it actually goes down, maybe it's because you have gained the skills and learned more that you're relying on it less. So this is kind of the performance support area. And oftentimes I think that's something that people miss, is to say they treat it as a linear relationship. If you use it more, you're learning more. Well, oftentimes actually, if you're learning more, you should be using it less, because now you've committed that to muscle memory there.
I'm without questioning already taking that one away. Probably going to use it later today for some stuff I gotta smarten myself up on. So thank you for that. Now, is it okay if I take us back to earlier in the? Okay, so we do a lot of learning and development for organizations, and they're always about how do we measure, how do we, and they always want to do the survey. They always want to be like, oh, well, it's mandatory to complete this work. Well, that's not a great measurement because it's mandatory to complete it, right? It's not. And we try to talk to them about behavioral change, and have we seen, cybersecurity is a hot one right now, right? Like it's an easy one to say, have we seen changes in behavior, that sort of thing. But they don't necessarily buy into that as much as some other things. Do you have some good thoughts or considerations for our clients out there that are trying to become better in learning and development, but it's not their area of expertise? Cybersecurity is their area of skill and capability. Is there things that you could either impart upon them today, or is there training that you could have them take, or like what would you be doing if you only had a client for 8 minutes?
University. Go ahead. I mean,
for the 4-minute university, I got to get signed up.
If you got 4 minutes a week, Nabeel will teach you everything you need to know about learning, and you don't need to spend money to go to Columbia or any other place.
Yeah. And so the short answer to your question, Laurel, is no. So I have nothing to say. No, I'm just kidding, of course. But but I think there are a couple of considerations. So one is, if you can inform, so similar to Ed, as you were talking about, a lot of what I try to talk about in my 4-minute university is through, maybe just to give a background on that, because I think it's going to help to answer the question, and then we can go deeper into your questions as well, Laurel, is I did my doctorate in instructional technology or educational technology, which is again around how people learn. And that was 15 or so years ago or so. And what I've seen since then in the workplace is I will see a lot of times people will have preconceived notions or stereotypes that are often false around how do people best learn. And it oftentimes has very little to do with the subject matter. It's really more about how the learning is delivered, or understanding the motivations or psychological aspects of people. And so that's what really motivated me probably a couple months ago, honestly, to start. I kept seeing this, and I'm like, okay, well, I think I feel like I have enough that I can say from my own experience, and both the academic side as well as the professional side, to give an informed opinion about this, because honestly, I was just getting tired of hearing lots of bad advice out there. And especially with social media these days, we see that happening more and more. And so I'll revisit that in a bit, but I want to get back to your question specifically is, so around, like, let's say a cybersecurity or whatever else, there's a few very simple concepts. So for instance, in a recent issue on my university, the newsletter, I talked about taking a weekend course, like a crash course. Versus,
I thought you were going to talk about scaffolding.
Oh, well, yeah, it depends how much time you have, Ed. So I'm here all day.
We got time. We have a very supportive sponsor.
Sure.
Tell us about the weekend course.
So oftentimes people are like, oh, okay, let's do a cyber course, for instance, as you're mentioning, Laurel. Let's do it in a couple of days, a crash course over a weekend. And this will be great. People will learn, and then they'll be good to go. And while it achieves the short-term objective of going through the content, and where it lacks is understanding how people learn. Typically, is that the example that I use in one of my most recent issues was, I took a course while I was at Columbia, which is where I got my doctorate, and it was a weekend course, and it looked good on paper. I could get a couple credits, and then to this day, I don't even remember the name of the course, let alone anything that I learned about it, because while it achieved the short-term objective of getting credits, it didn't do anything for me in the long term. And so my point is that oftentimes organizations, they really, to me, this is probably one of the biggest takeaways, is that shift from a one-time learning experience to smaller, not necessarily shorter chunks, but more frequent ones that are spaced out. And this is what I was talking about, the sort of educational theory of spaced learning, is that because it's looking to counteract what we call the forgetting curve. Within a day, you forget about 40-50% of what you learn, and then it just keeps going down. So if you then counter that by spacing and doing reinforcements over a specified period of time at certain intervals, then you can up the ability for people to remember certain types of content and practice it. And so to me, that's one very simple way that it doesn't really matter what the subject matter is. It's about how you apply it and how you can potentially reinforce it there. So that's one. And then the one that Ed was talking about is the scaffolding side. So for instance, maybe I hope it's okay to assume we all can ride a bicycle, or we used to know how to ride a bicycle at one point. Is that, how did you start out? Right? Is that you didn't start out just by trying to ride and keep crashing, skinning your knees and elbows. You would have training wheels on, right? And then, so, it turns, or maybe you didn't, I don't know. Right. And then, or
Laurel would fall down a lot.
Exactly. Yeah. And then you have someone holding you, right? So let's say your parent or an adult or a sibling holding you once the training wheels are off, because when you really break down the skills of riding a bike, one of it is balance, which typically is the harder part, but the other are the mechanics of holding on to the handlebar, pedaling, and keeping enough momentum. And so the training wheels kind of help you with the first part. Is you don't have to worry about the balance now, but we are going to just focus on the mechanics of steering, direction, pedaling, and then we take the training wheels off and we start to help you with the balance a little bit more. So similarly, the reason why I mention that is oftentimes organizations, this educational theory is known as scaffolding. Think about scaffolding within buildings, a support structure to where once you get to full competence, then you can remove the scaffolding. So to me, that's another one where if you're starting to look at a complex topic like a cybersecurity or AI-based or machine learning, is how do you take, for lack of a better phrase, more baby steps to help them and support them. Once they get comfortable enough at a high enough competence level, then you can remove that scaffolding. So then what happens is then you reduce the risk of people just falling off. Think of like a diet or exercise, right? I'm going to run 5 miles today, first time. I'm so tired that I'm not going to do it for another month, right? It's that you didn't scaffold it enough. Maybe you do a mile and you start to build up to it. So, yep.
That's great. And I do have to seriously say, so I receive, every Saturday morning, I guess you send it out, and it is very bite-sized, but it is filled with, just good protein, if you will, from the standpoint of the mind. There's no filler in there. Yep. And the piece on scaffolding, I thought was right on target of the things you do to make learning more effective. There were different times in my career I've worked with organizations. They wanted to do something. They wanted to do a course. And I'd say, what are we going to do to support it once it happens? Oh, nothing. It's a checklist kind of mentality. So, really important kinds of concepts there. And you do a lot of scaffolding, right, Laurel?
I do. And I also learned on a bicycle with not a lot of support, because on the farm, there wasn't a lot of any of that. There was a lot of gravel that you had to learn on.
Yeah.
And brothers that would make fun of you because it was cool to see your sister bleed. But what's interesting about it all is it made me stronger and faster to learn because it hurt more every time.
So are you suggesting we need to bleed to learn more effectively?
Just a little bit of blood to make the heart grow stronger.
There you go. Different strokes for different folks, right?
That's right. So is it okay if I take us on a right turn here? Again, with learning, because I think that I think there's so much potential in organizations to really up their game if they bring in the right learning, if they bring in the right philosophies for how they want their team to grow. What's your opinion on gamifying learning? So you've got some content, and then you've got a game that's fun and sassy, but it actually does somehow reinforce what you just learned without you realizing that that's what happened. What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. And before I answer that, one of the things, since we're talking about the corporate side of learning, is a big kind of, I would say, pet peeve of mine is when people call it training. And it seems like a small thing, but oftentimes in organizations, I hear people talk about training versus learning. And really, at the end of the day, it's really achieves the same concept, but it's the perspective of what you're looking at it from. So training is typically saying, okay, well, I'm the HR learning department, I'm the person, the teacher, I'm training you on this. Whereas learning is more you're receiving, and it's more personal growth, and it's really focused on the end learner or user there. So I always like to use learning, and I know we're amongst friends here.
Training is for dogs.
Exactly, right. And so
You train your dog to do something, to repeat it,
exactly.
conditional. I mean, learning is a larger encompassing thing. I completely agree with you.
And again, training it's useful in a lot of ways. Like for instance, I mean, a gateway for the first 2 weeks, so you need to be trained on some of the aspects. But after that, for continual professional development, learning is usually, in my opinion, the phrase that you want to use. So to your question,
learning is about growth.
Correct, exactly. And so around the Laura, your question around, let's say, gamification or game mechanics, I am a proponent of that in situations where it makes sense, where people feel like, okay, I'm going to get something, I can see the value of it. And so an example would be similar to, as I mentioned, at my time at KPMG, working with some industry leaders. I work with another industry leader around, I think they were in the they were in the manufacturing space. So think like cars and automotive, et cetera there. And we were trying, and this was the head of the entire manufacturer automotive industry for the US. So had a very large book of business, so to speak, was responsible for a couple of thousand employees. And we sat down, we were talking about the business challenges that he was looking for. And it was clear, like with most of them, and part of the reason why I think learning gets a bad rap, which may be sort of self-inflicted, is people think of courses, right? Is that their mindset is when they think of learning or training, they think some self-paced course, a page turner, and I don't want to spend time doing this because it's going to take time away from my job. So helping to shift that perspective, Laurel, as you're mentioning, one good way to do that is to employ more, let's call it a game mechanics type of area. But at the same time too, that has potential to quote unquote backfire, where people may view it as it being less serious. I don't want to play a game at work, I'm trying to make more money. Do I really need to play a game, so to speak? So this is where I think the mechanics aspect of it, without it maybe on the surface seeming like a game, can be important. So the mechanics that I mentioned are, for instance, have some sort of competitive nature to it, have it be team-based versus individual, have some sort of ranking aspect where to say, just like in reality, there can be a winner, but there can also be losers as well. So more specifically, the example around automotive is my team at KPMG. We actually created, I would say, 7 or 8 different ones. But one of the first ones that we created for all the different industries, we did one where it was a team based. So 25 people, 5 teams of 5, let's say, they would get a realistic type scenario of something that's happening in the automotive industry. So for instance, there's an incumbent like a GE, a Ford, who they have the majority of the market share. There's a fast growing startup, EV, electric vehicle, Tesla type startup, or Lucid or wherever else, who has a different technology that they're bringing to market. There's another company who owns patents on very certain key automotive or manufacturing aspects. And each team would be a different company, and they would have to make strategic decisions over the course of a couple of fiscal years, for instance. So one decision a quarter or one decision a year, and then they would get outputs or results of that, and then there would be a debrief session. And so my point is that it was essentially a game, but it didn't feel like a game, and they were all competing because they're competitive by nature, because they're consultants. They were competing with each other to try to make the better decision, because then the outcomes would affect who had the most market share or who had the most revenue at the end of this cycle, so to speak. And we did this for, we had different formats that we did, but we often piloted it in a 1-day in-person sort of 8-hour session. And what we found out is that the industry leader who came in that day to give a talk and just say the importance of it, he was so into it that he stayed for the whole day, even though he had other meetings and clients to get to, because he was really interested in it as well. And so what we found out is that, back to your point, Laurel, is that the game mechanics, in my opinion, can work really well, because in part, if done properly, people don't feel like that they're learning. And that to me is a good litmus test on if learning can work, is that if you're just interested and immersed into something, and if you happen to be learning about something by chance, or even though it's designed, but you don't feel like it's a training or you're taking a course, that to me can have exponential benefits. And that's what we saw. And then the last thing I'll say, and then I'll stop, is that after we ran a couple of pilots, we then took this to some internal kind of corporate universities where, let's say, the consulting division would have a week in Orlando, for instance, and they would have a bunch of courses that people would take, almost like an internal conference. And we said, okay, let's try to offer this simulation, as we call it. We call them business simulations. And you would make some decisions. It would mostly be paper-based, but it's all digital as well. You didn't put it into a computer. But again, team-based, competitive, every team has a different profile, and you're looking to make better business decisions. So at about 50 different offerings at this internal university, the very first time we did it, from our rankings, like the surveys, the smiley sheets, and say what you will about those, we ranked second out of 50 the very first time we did it. So we're like, okay, we've got something here. So that was good for us to then get some good positive momentum.
Who ranked number one?
It was it will be a conversation for another day. I'll tell you.
Okay. But actually, so your company, I mean, I hear companies all the time saying we are really a technology company,
Yep.
right? But it sounds like changeforce.ai obviously is a technology company, but it's really a learning company. And I'm wondering, is there a benchmark or an example from an organization or a case study that really motivates you of this is a place that does it right, or this is a case example that does it right?
Yeah, I feel like I was at IBM for several years, from maybe 2007 to 2014, 2015. And I feel like even to this day, there's a lot of things that I did there that I still haven't seen at other organizations. And I feel like at the same time, I feel like they had a unique mixture of, they were a technology company, but they also had a very deep learning culture, but also a culture of experimentation where, try something out. If you get enough internal traction, then we'll start to support it. So I think it had the unique ingredients and the mixture of those to do things that were, despite, let's say, the technology, were sort of very successful there. And so even to this day, I feel like a lot of what I've seen at IBM, and this is well before AI, and obviously they've done a lot of things. They've had a couple stumbling blocks, let's say, in the AI world, but regardless, some of the core concepts and really building a culture around it is, it's almost like you're a product of your environment. And we see this with people too, is that if you put somebody who's, let's say, behaving a certain way and you put them in a different environment, all of a sudden their behavior changes for the better. The environment has a lot to do, in my opinion, on the results and the impact of the outcomes that you produce. And so if you can put yourself and surround yourself in a certain type of environment, then it's almost a limitless possibilities and opportunities.
Well, I think the environment's always the situation, because at the farm, me bleeding while trying to ride the bicycle, that was just normal biz. That's just what just happened. Maybe in the city, I would go to, welfare or child welfare for some care. I feel terrible that we're coming to the end of this chat.
No, I got another question that I have to do for Nabeel. It's urgent.
Okay, one. Urgent? Okay, go.
So Nabeel, you teach a lot. I've seen your students. They love you. You're one of the top-ranked Columbia University professors. I would assume it's the same when you were at NYU. You teach dozens of different things. What is the favorite section that you teach? So maybe you're teaching 12 classes during the course of a term. What is that one concept that you love learning that you think maybe you're connected with the students, or maybe you don't have one? I always have certain things that I really look forward to.
Yeah, sure.
Is that one class, that session, that this is the one that I love. I have fun with it. It's cool. It's maybe new age. What is it for you, Nabeel? What's the thing you love to teach most on that one night from 8 to 10 or whatever?
Yeah, this is actually how I started my form at university, is that I started doing almost like, I would say, I called it 4 years and 30 minutes is what I called it in class. And it was always an impromptu session.
Wow.
Where I would
Okay.
say, take 4 years of what I learned during my doctoral studies at Columbia. Let me give it to you in 30 minutes on here's basic things on how people learn. And I would just show them, like, okay, if you're trying to learn one area, and I would show them some slides, and I would purposely put 200 words on the slide, just a bunch of gobbledygook, basically. And then I would show the slide, and I would just start talking about something else. And then the whole point was to confuse them. And then after I would hide the slide and I'd said, what did the slide say? And then the people who were listening to me, they had no idea. And then I would say, well, what did I say? And then what I found out is half the people were listening to me and half the people were watching or reading the slide, but they were at conflict with one another because they were different things. And so I use it to illustrate a concept around what's called cognitive overload or cognitive load around how you present information and how you get people to learn. And I did it for 2 or 3 years, in all honesty. And just because it was something that I can just do off the top of my head, and I would talk about it. And that's really what formed say, all right, well, if I'm doing it for these 20, 30 students in a class every semester, they all loved it. And it was just impromptu. Why don't we bring it to the masses there? So that's kind of the impetus for how
4 years in 30 minutes and a bunch of words and you talking and not lined up. And what do we get from that? And yeah, I love that.
Indeed.
I may steal that for you, or better yet, have you come and give you 30 minutes and do your thing.
There it is.
That sounds like fun.
Yep. And that's the 4-minute university now. Then I tried 4 years and 4 minutes. I'm like, it's a little too much. Yeah. And then that's
and again, you've hit it right on the nail with the 4-minute university. I look forward to that every week in terms of encapsulating the learning.
There you go.
What would you tell us in 40 minutes, Laurel, that you've learned from this session?
From this, oh my gosh. Okay. Like I got Dolly, I got to check out. Hemingway, I got to check out. I really, really need to just get back to the basics of making sure that the behavior is balanced with the environment of which we're taking the education, the development, the learning, the growth into. Because if it isn't, we have to then educate the people that want to do the learning and say, hey, we got to first work on the environment before we ever try to change this behavior. Like those are the key ones. Like there's so much flooding in the old brain right now. Yeah, it's fantastic.
You'll be an A student, no question. You should come take our program.
Absolutely. I'm going to come visit you at a minimum.
You want to? Oh, absolutely. There's always a spare room, spare place. Or we could visit Nabeel in New York.
There you go. Always welcome.
Even though he hasn't invited us, but I assume he would if we did it publicly on the podcast.
That was our invitation right there, when he laughed right there. Nabeel, we do have to run, but before we go, can you give us what your superpower is, and how you water it regularly to make sure that it stays super?
Sure. Yeah. And I think really for me, if just to follow on some of the things I was saying earlier, where I feel like I've been able to really help out people a lot is just helping them to figure out how people learn. And I've been doing this well before. I do a lot with my kids now, and I've been doing it in the workplace. And now I'm starting to do a little bit more publicly, is just to help to remove some of the barriers and help people just get very simple things around. Here's how you learn. Here's how you can apply it in your life. And here's how you can make things better. And I feel like over really the past couple of years, that's starting to become more of the superpower, so to speak, in my area. And really looking forward to just sharing it and helping everyone out just to be better version of themselves. And thank you again for the time, and super excited and a great chat, and really looking forward to seeing future episodes of your podcast.
Yeah, well, I can't wait for us to collaborate again in the future, because without question, you gave me a lot of great energy mojo to take to my clients right now. And there's nothing better for a consulting firm to have some nice little pick-me-up, nice little lift up. So thank you so much for that.
You seem surprised at how good he was. I told you how great he was.
Ed, don't you be mean. I always know you bring on the best guests. Come on, man. Come on. I have some trauma that I got to work through from my cycling days now, that the rest of my day. But outside of that,
okay. Yeah, a lot of blood. Oh, well.
Ed, any last words to depart with before we call it a day?
No, I think really you summarized it. Thank you so much, Nabeel. We had a good time with this. I think one of the things you centered is the importance of technology and data. We know that. The importance of human element, we know that. And the key is, how do we get towards those business changes, and the central role of learning, and the fact that changeforce.ai, that's one of the things you're focused on, is how do you promote learn. And I would just encourage people to check out the 4-Minute University. It really is it's beautifully done. And as always, a pleasure, Laurel. And
so how do we sign up for the 4-Minute University? Because I'm going to sign up. How do we sign up?
Right now, it's 4minuteuniversity.com. As simple as that. You can just go there.
Just that, literally that easy. Perfect.
Indeed.
Thank you so
Is
much.
that a
Well,
four?
have
The
a great
number,
rest of
is
your day.
that a number four or the 4 OUR?
It's the word for FOUR.
Word
And
for
a quick tech tip just to leave us here is that typically if you use a number in a domain name like a URL, like let's say it's 4234.com, those are often associated with spam. So if you ever try to buy a domain that has a number in it, or if you're looking at one, oftentimes internet service providers will flag that as spam, because I was going to buy it with the number 4, and then I realized, and so it's also
smart. That's good.
And so that site that I bought for Ed, Ed4U isn't working out so well. So that's interesting.
No, it's not
Okay.
good.
All right.
A lot of very strange responses. But,
Thank you so much. I look forward to having you back on our show. And I look forward to the 4-Minute University chats on Saturdays.
Right.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Okay. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Mission Driven Leader podcast presented by TaleoConnects.com. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast and leave a review wherever you listen to the show.